The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Captain Alina, Kraken, Vasquez crouched beside the stubborn signal relay box, her weathered hands working methodically through a maze of corroded wires. 23 years of service had taught her that the most critical battles often began with the smallest failures. The communications array at Forward Operating Base Meridian had been flickering intermittently for 3 days, and while the younger technicians scratched their heads and consulted their tablets, Alina knew the problem lay deeper than any diagnostic could reveal. Her fingers found the loose connection just as boots echoed down the corridor behind her. Heavy, deliberate steps that belonged to someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. She didn't look up, even when the footsteps stopped directly behind her position. The steady rhythm of her breathing remained unchanged, a discipline carved from countless hours in cockpits where panic meant death. "Ma'am, the Admiral's requesting." The young corporal's voice died mid-sentence. Alina felt the shift in the air, that particular electricity that comes when someone of significant rank enters a space. She continued her work, replacing a frayed wire with practiced efficiency. The signal box hummed back to life, its green indicators steady and strong for the first time in 72 hours. "Outstanding work, Captain." The voice carried decades of command authority, tinged with something else. Recognition, perhaps, or curiosity. Alina finally turned, her eyes meeting those of Admiral Harrison Blackwood, a man whose reputation preceded him into every room like an advance guard. His gaze dropped to her flight vest, specifically to the small, faded patch sewn just below her name tape. 8 tentacles wrapped around a lightning bolt with a single word beneath: Kraken. The Admiral's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. His eyebrows drew together, and for a moment the commanding officer disappeared, replaced by something resembling awe mixed with disbelief. His lips parted slightly, as if tasting a half-remembered name from another lifetime. "Kraken." The word escaped as barely more than a whisper, carrying weight that seemed to surprise even him. Alina straightened to attention, her boots clicking together with military precision. "Yes, sir. Captain Alina Vasquez reporting." The Admiral's eyes remained fixed on the patch, his mind clearly racing through classified files and mission reports that most people would never see. Around them, the base continued its routine operations, but in this corridor, time seemed suspended. The signal box continued its steady hum, now properly functioning thanks to Alina's intervention, but neither officer paid it any attention. "I need to see your complete service record," Admiral Blackwood said finally, his voice regaining its professional edge while retaining an undertone of something deeper. "Immediately." The fluorescent lights continued their insect-like buzzing, casting harsh shadows across 2 faces that had seen too much of war's reality. One carried the weight of current command, the other bore scars from battles that officially never happened. Alina Vasquez had spent 5 years trying to fade into maintenance obscurity, fixing broken equipment, and avoiding the kind of attention that came with her particular skill set. But shadows have a way of finding light, and some legends refuse to stay buried beneath routine duty assignments and deliberately overlooked personnel files. The Admiral's whispered recognition of her call sign meant that her carefully constructed invisibility was about to shatter like aircraft glass under enemy fire. In the next few hours, Alina would discover that some talents are too valuable to remain hidden, especially when the world teeters on the edge of conflicts that demand the kind of pilot who earns tentacle-wrapped lightning bolts on their vest. Admiral Blackwood's fingers drummed against his thigh, a nervous habit that betrayed the significance of this unexpected encounter. He had come to FOB Meridian for a routine inspection, expecting to review standard operations and personnel reports. Instead, he had stumbled upon a ghost from the military's most classified archives, a pilot whose existence was known only to a select few within the Pentagon's deepest circles. "Captain Vasquez," he began, his voice carrying the weight of decisions that would reshape both their futures. "We need to talk." The signal box's steady green lights pulsed like a heartbeat, marking time in a moment that would soon explode into something far beyond a simple equipment repair. Alina's carefully maintained anonymity was about to become the catalyst for events that would test every skill she had spent years trying to forget. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, their dark masses promising turbulence ahead. The weather report had called for clear skies, but meteorology had always been an imperfect science. Some storms arrive without warning, carrying winds strong enough to change the course of history itself. Alina's hands remained steady despite the implications of the Admiral's recognition. 23 years of service had taught her many lessons, but perhaps the most important was this. When your past finally catches up with you, the only choice is to face it with the same precision that had kept her alive through missions that existed only in redacted files and classified memories. The corridor suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls themselves understood the gravity of what had just transpired. Admiral Blackwood's presence seemed to fill the space, his authority radiating outward like heat from an engine under full power. But Alina had faced down enemy pilots in aircraft moving at twice the speed of sound. A conversation with a superior officer, regardless of his rank, was simply another type of engagement requiring different tactics. "Where would you like to conduct this discussion, sir?" she asked, her voice maintaining the professional neutrality that had served her well during years of deliberate mediocrity. Admiral Blackwood glanced around the corridor, noting the steady flow of personnel passing by, their curious glances lingering on the unusual sight of such high-ranking attention focused on a maintenance captain. "My temporary office will suffice. Follow me." As they walked through the base's corridors, Alina's mind raced through possibilities and scenarios. The Admiral's recognition of her call sign could mean several things, none of them particularly conducive to maintaining her preferred low profile. Her service record contained operations that officially never happened, victories that existed only in classified briefings, and losses that haunted the dreams of pilots who survived to remember them. The storm clouds outside continued their approach, their shadows sliding across the base like dark fingers probing for weaknesses. Alina had learned to read weather patterns from the cockpit of aircraft moving faster than most people could comprehend, and these clouds carried the promise of significant turbulence ahead. Admiral Blackwood's temporary office occupied a corner of the base commander's building, its windows offering a clear view of the flight line where various aircraft sat in neat rows like sleeping predators. Alina's eyes automatically cataloged each airframe, noting maintenance schedules and operational readiness with the unconscious expertise of someone who had spent decades making life-or-death decisions based on mechanical reliability. The Admiral closed the door behind them, the soft click echoing with finality. Outside, the first drops of rain began striking the windows, each impact marking seconds in a countdown towards something Alina couldn't yet identify, but instinctively knew would test every skill she had spent 5 years trying to suppress. "Captain Vasquez," Admiral Blackwood began, settling behind the desk with the careful movements of someone whose decisions carried global consequences. "Your current assignment is about to change dramatically." The rain intensified, drumming against the glass with increasing urgency. Alina remained at attention, her expression neutral despite the growing certainty that her period of peaceful anonymity was about to end in a way that would demand every lesson learned from missions that existed only in nightmares and classified success stories. Thunder rolled across the base, its rumble mixing with the sound of aircraft engines warming up for evening training flights. Some storms announce themselves with gentle warnings, others arrive with the sudden violence of combat engagements. Alina Vasquez was about to discover which type of tempest her past had finally unleashed upon her carefully constructed present. Admiral Blackwood reached into his briefcase and withdrew a file so thick it required both hands to lift. The cover bore classifications that Alina recognized from her darkest operational periods, markings that indicated information capable of reshaping international relationships or ending political careers. When he opened it, her service photograph from 15 years ago stared back at her, taken during a time when her eyes held a different kind of fire, and her face showed the lean hunger of someone who lived for the next mission. Operation Midnight Serpent, the Admiral said, his voice dropping to a near whisper despite the office's privacy. Operation Burning Glass, Operation Steel Thunder. Each name hit Alina like a physical blow, memories flooding back with the force of high-altitude decompression. Should I continue, or do these bring back sufficient recollection? Alina's composure remained intact, but inside, pieces of her carefully constructed new identity began cracking like ice under pressure. Those operations represented the pinnacle of her career, missions so sensitive that their success or failure could have altered the balance of global power. They also represented the period of her life that had nearly destroyed her soul, leaving scars that 5 years of routine maintenance work had only partially healed. I remember them, sir. Her voice carried no emotion, a professional response that revealed nothing of the psychological earthquake occurring beneath her surface calm. Admiral Blackwood turned several pages, revealing after-action reports written in the clinical language that military bureaucracy used to sanitize the brutal reality of warfare. 17 confirmed aerial victories, 12 successful deep penetration reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines, 4 successful pilot rescue operations in hostile territory. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers directly. And 1 incident that resulted in your request for transfer to non-combat operations. The last reference hung in the air between them like unexploded ordnance. Alina's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only visible sign that Admiral Blackwood had touched something she preferred to keep buried. The incident in question had saved 32 lives and prevented an international crisis, but it had cost her something more valuable than career advancement or public recognition. It had cost her the ability to see herself as anything other than a weapon, designed for purposes that sometimes conflicted with her humanity. Sir, my current assignment is fulfilling, and... Captain, Admiral Blackwood's interruption was gentle but absolute. The world situation has evolved beyond the luxury of allowing our most capable assets to remain hidden in maintenance roles. Your country needs Alina Vasquez, not the anonymous captain who fixes communication equipment. Outside, lightning illuminated the storm clouds, their electrical discharge providing brief moments of clarity in the growing darkness. Alina watched the display through the office windows, recognizing the metaphor with bitter appreciation. Some illumination comes at the cost of revealing things better left in shadow. What exactly are you asking of me, sir? Admiral Blackwood closed the file with deliberate precision, his movements suggesting that this conversation represented a point of no return for both participants. I'm not asking, Captain. I'm informing you that as of 0800 hours tomorrow, you are reassigned to Special Operations Command for a mission that requires your specific expertise. The thunder outside seemed to punctuate his words, rolling across the base with the inevitability of decisions made at levels far above Alina's pay grade. She had spent 5 years believing that her past would remain buried beneath routine duty assignments and deliberately overlooked performance evaluations. But military necessity has its own logic, and exceptional skills have a way of demanding exceptional service regardless of personal preferences. Alina straightened to full attention, her body automatically assuming the posture of a soldier receiving orders that would change everything. Understood, sir. May I ask about the nature of this mission? Admiral Blackwood's expression grew even more serious, if such a thing were possible. You'll receive a full briefing at 0700, but I can tell you this much. We have a situation developing that requires someone capable of flying in conditions and circumstances that would be impossible for conventional pilots. The phrase, impossible for conventional pilots, resonated with Alina's memory like a frequency tuned to unlock doors she had tried to keep sealed. Throughout her career, those words had preceded missions that existed at the intersection of skill, courage, and controlled insanity. They represented assignments that pushed aircraft and pilot beyond normal operational limits, into realms where success required intuition as much as training. Admiral Blackwood stood, moving to the window where he could observe the storm's approach across the airfield. "Captain, I know you've found peace in your current role. I know you've built a life that doesn't require you to make the kind of decisions that keep commanders awake at night." He turned back to face her, his expression carrying the weight of someone who understood the cost of exceptional service. "But some situations demand our best people, regardless of their preferences." Alina absorbed his words while calculating the implications of her return to operational status. 5 years of routine maintenance work had allowed her skills to remain sharp, while providing emotional distance from the kind of high-stakes decision-making that had nearly broken her. Now, that carefully maintained equilibrium was about to be shattered by the same military necessity that had originally shaped her into one of the most capable pilots of her generation. "Sir, may I ask why my specific skill set is required? Surely there are other pilots with current operational experience who could." "Captain," Admiral Blackwood's interruption was firm but not unkind. "When this briefing concludes tomorrow morning, you'll understand exactly why no one else can accomplish what we need done." Outside, the storm had fully arrived, its winds driving rain against the windows with increasing intensity. The meteorological violence served as an appropriate backdrop for a conversation that was reshaping Alina's future with similar force. Weather systems and military necessity shared certain characteristics. Both arrived without regard for personal convenience, and both possessed the power to alter landscapes in ways that couldn't be undone. Alina's mind began the automatic process of mental preparation that had preceded every significant mission of her career. The routines of psychological readiness, the careful examination of equipment and procedures, the methodical review of contingency plans, all of it came flooding back with the muscle memory of someone who had survived by making preparation an art form. Admiral Blackwood returned to his desk, but remained standing, his posture suggesting that their interview was approaching its conclusion. "Captain, I want you to understand something important. This reassignment isn't punishment for maintaining a low profile, and it isn't a reward for past achievements. It's simply necessity." The distinction mattered more than most people would realize. Alina had seen too many exceptional soldiers destroyed by assignments that felt like validation or retribution. Military necessity, while emotionally neutral, at least provided clarity about expectations and objectives. When personal feelings were removed from the equation, focus became possible in ways that emotional motivation couldn't match. "Understood, sir. Is there anything specific I should do to prepare for tomorrow's briefing?" Admiral Blackwood's slight smile suggested appreciation for her professionalism. "Get a good night's sleep, Captain. Starting tomorrow, rest may become a luxury." The words carried implications that Alina recognized from previous assignments to Special Operations Command. Missions that required pilots like her rarely allowed for normal sleep schedules or predictable meal times. They existed in the spaces between official operations, where success often depended on the ability to function effectively while operating beyond normal human limits. Alina saluted with the precision that 23 years of service had made automatic. "Thank you, sir. I'll report for briefing at 0700 hours." As she turned to leave, Admiral Blackwood's voice stopped her at the door. "Captain Vasquez, Alina." The use of her first name was deliberate and significant. "Your country appreciates your service, both past and future." The storm outside had reached full intensity, its winds howling around the building with the kind of raw power that reminded people of nature's ultimate authority over human plans. Alina stepped into the corridor, leaving Admiral Blackwood's temporary office, with the knowledge that her 5 years of peaceful anonymity had just ended as suddenly as they had begun. The walk back to her quarters provided time to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. Special Operations Command assignments didn't come with advanced notice or gradual transitions. They arrived like lightning strikes, sudden and transformative, leaving behind landscapes that looked nothing like what had existed before the flash. Alina's quarters in the officers' housing area reflected the deliberate simplicity she had cultivated during her years in maintenance roles. Minimal personal effects, functional furniture, nothing that couldn't be packed and moved within a few hours if necessary. The lifestyle of someone who had learned that attachment to material possessions was a liability in professions where mobility often meant survival. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, listening to the storm's assault on the building's exterior while contemplating the implications of Admiral Blackwood's recognition. Her call sign patch, that small piece of fabric that contained more history than most people accumulated in entire careers, had betrayed her presence to someone with access to the military's most classified files. The nickname Kraken had been earned during a particularly complex mission over hostile territory, when her aircraft had emerged from what appeared to be certain destruction, with the kind of unexpected lethality that legends are built upon. 8 enemy aircraft had surrounded her, expecting easy prey. Instead, they had encountered something that moved through three-dimensional space with the fluid unpredictability of a creature designed for deep ocean hunting. Alina reached into her wall locker and withdrew a small wooden box that had accompanied her through every assignment of her career. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, lay a collection of items that most people would consider insignificant. A compass that had belonged to her grandfather, a photograph of her flight training class, and a letter written in her mother's careful handwriting that she had never had the courage to open. Each item represented a different aspect of the person she had been before military service had transformed her into something more and less than human. The compass pointed toward magnetic north with unwavering accuracy, just as her sense of duty had guided her through missions that tested every aspect of her character. The photograph showed 24 young faces filled with the kind of optimism that only exists before experience teaches harder lessons. The unopened letter had arrived during her darkest operational period, when missions were measured in lives saved rather than objectives accomplished. Her mother's words, whatever they contained, had seemed too pure for the psychological space Alina occupied during those months. Some communications are too precious to risk contaminating with the wrong context or emotional state. Thunder crashed overhead with renewed violence, its sound mixing with the steady drum of rain against her windows. Alina had always found storms oddly comforting, their chaos providing an external reflection of the turbulence that characterized her professional life. Weather systems and military operations shared certain fundamental characteristics. Both required careful preparation, both could change dramatically without warning, and both possessed the power to humble anyone who underestimated their potential for destruction. Her reflection was interrupted by a soft knock on her door. Alina opened it to find a young airman holding an envelope marked with classifications that indicated urgent delivery was required regardless of time or circumstances. "Ma'am, Admiral Blackwood requested immediate delivery." Alina accepted the envelope, noting its weight and the careful sealing that suggested contents of significant importance. After the airman departed, she examined the exterior markings with the attention to detail that had kept her alive through situations where overlooking small indicators could prove fatal. Inside, she found orders that formally transferred her to Special Operations Command effective immediately, along with travel documents and a brief note in Admiral Blackwood's handwriting. "Tomorrow's briefing will explain everything. Trust the process." The phrase, "trust the process," carried special meaning within military special operations communities. It represented faith in systems and procedures that had been developed through hard experience, often at the cost of lives lost during the learning process. When commanders used those words, they were asking subordinates to accept missions based on institutional knowledge rather than complete information. Alina set the orders aside and returned to her window, watching the storm's continued assault on the base's infrastructure. Lightning illuminated the flight line where various aircraft waited out the weather, their forms creating geometric shadows against the runway's surface. Each airframe represented millions of dollars of engineering excellence and thousands of hours of pilot training. But in the end, they were simply tools waiting for someone skilled enough to unlock their potential. Her reflection in the window glass showed a face that had aged well despite the stress of military service. Lines around her eyes spoke of years, spent squinting through aircraft canopies at hostile territory, while her posture retained the alert readiness of someone accustomed to operating in environments where relaxation could prove fatal. The storm began to weaken, its fury gradually subsiding into the steady rain that would continue through the night. Alina prepared for sleep with the methodical routine that had served her through countless pre-mission nights, when rest became a tactical necessity rather than a comfort. Tomorrow would bring changes that would reshape her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. But tonight, she could still pretend that her greatest challenge would be fixing another broken communication array. As she settled into bed, Alina's mind began the automatic process of mental preparation that preceded every significant transition in her career. The careful examination of known factors, the identification of potential variables, the methodical review of skills and knowledge that might prove relevant, all of it came flooding back with the muscle memory of someone who had survived by making preparation an art form. Outside, the storm's retreat left behind a silence that felt heavy with promise and threat in equal measure. Alina closed her eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring the kind of briefing that changed everything, the type of mission assignment that would test every skill she had spent 5 years trying to forget. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was the distant sound of aircraft engines warming up for late-night training flights, their mechanical voices singing the songs of preparation and readiness that had provided the soundtrack to her entire adult life. Some melodies never lose their power to comfort, even when they herald the approach of uncertainty that could reshape everything that came after. Dawn arrived with the crisp clarity that follows storm systems, the air washed clean and carrying the promise of unlimited visibility. Alina woke before her alarm, a habit developed during years when survival often depended on maintaining awareness even during sleep. The base around her was already stirring to life, its daily rhythm beginning the complex dance of maintenance, training, and preparation that kept military forces ready for whatever challenges might emerge from a world that rarely provided advance notice of its intentions. Her morning routine included elements that most people would find excessive: physical conditioning that went beyond standard fitness requirements, mental exercises designed to maintain the kind of reflexes that measured response time in fractions of seconds, and equipment checks that approached ritual in their thoroughness. Alina had learned that preparation was the only insurance policy available in professions where mistakes carried consequences that couldn't be undone. The officers' club dining facility buzzed with the usual morning conversations, but Alina noticed the way discussions stopped when she passed certain tables. News traveled fast in military communities, and her reassignment to Special Operations Command had apparently generated the kind of speculation that accompanied significant personnel changes. She collected coffee and a simple breakfast, choosing a table that provided clear sightlines to all entrances while allowing her to observe the room's overall dynamics. Admiral Blackwood entered precisely at 06:45, his timing suggesting the kind of personal discipline that successful senior officers develop through decades of making punctuality a matter of professional pride. He approached Alina's table with the confident stride of someone accustomed to having his presence reshape conversations wherever he went. "Captain Vasquez, I trust you slept well." Alina stood and saluted, nodding the Admiral's obvious comfort with early morning operations. "Yes, sir. Thank you for asking." "Excellent. Finish your breakfast and meet me in Conference Room Alpha in 15 minutes. The briefing team is already assembled." The words "briefing team" suggested that whatever mission awaited her approval would involve multiple agencies and classification levels that indicated national security implications. Alina had participated in enough high-level briefings to recognize the administrative signature of operations that existed at the intersection of military capability and political necessity. Conference Room Alpha occupied a secure section of the base commander's building, its windows replaced with solid walls, and its entrance guarded by personnel who checked identification with the kind of attention that suggested serious consequences for security breaches. Alina presented her credentials and submitted to the electronic scanning that verified both her identity and her clearance level. Inside, she found a room arranged for detailed presentations, with multiple screens capable of displaying classified information and seating for perhaps 20 people. Currently, only 5 individuals occupied the space: Admiral Blackwood, 2 officers she didn't recognize, a civilian wearing the kind of conservative suit that suggested intelligence community affiliation, and a woman in Air Force uniform whose insignia indicated pilot qualifications and senior rank. "Captain Vasquez," Admiral Blackwood began, "allow me to introduce the team that will be supporting your mission." He gestured toward each person in turn. "Colonel Martinez, our operational liaison, Dr. Harrison from the Defense Intelligence Agency, Ms. Chen from the State Department, and Colonel Patricia Viper Anderson, who will be serving as your operational backup." Alina shook hands with each team member, nodding the way Colonel Anderson's grip conveyed both strength and the kind of mutual recognition that exists between pilots who had operated at similar levels. The woman's call sign and bearing suggested someone with extensive combat experience and the kind of confidence that came from surviving situations where skill determined whether you returned home or became a classified casualty statistic. Dr. Harrison activated the room's primary display screen, revealing a map that Alina recognized as covering a region of significant geopolitical importance. Current political boundaries were marked in various colors, with certain areas highlighted in ways that suggested ongoing conflicts or areas of particular interest to intelligence agencies. "Captain Vasquez," Dr. Harrison began, "what you're about to see is classified at the highest levels. The mission we're discussing could have implications for international stability if executed incorrectly, or if its existence becomes known to unauthorized parties." Alina absorbed the warning while studying the map's details. The highlighted region included several countries that had been experiencing increasing tensions, with military buildups and diplomatic incidents that suggested the possibility of broader conflicts. Intelligence briefings that began with warnings about international stability usually involved missions that existed in the gray areas between official military operations and action that governments couldn't afford to acknowledge. Ms. Chen stepped forward, her demeanor suggesting someone accustomed to dealing with situations where political and military considerations intersected in complex ways. "Captain, we have a developing situation that requires immediate action by someone with your specific qualifications. 3 days ago, a diplomatic courier was captured while attempting to deliver sensitive materials to one of our allies in the region." The phrase "sensitive materials" could mean anything from routine intelligence reports to information capable of shifting the balance of power between nations. Alina had carried similar materials during her previous special operations assignments, understanding that sometimes the difference between war and peace could be measured in the speed and stealth with which information reached its intended recipients. Colonel Martinez activated a secondary screen showing satellite imagery of mountainous terrain crisscrossed with roads that appeared to have been carved directly into cliff faces. The courier is being held at a facility approximately 200 kilometers behind enemy lines, in terrain that makes conventional rescue operations extremely difficult. Alina studied the topographical details with the practiced eye of someone who had planned and executed missions in similar environments. The mountains rose to altitudes that would challenge aircraft performance, while the narrow valleys and steep approaches would limit options for both ingress and egress routes. It was exactly the kind of terrain that required pilots capable of operating beyond normal safety margins. "Sir," Elena said, "may I ask about the timeline for this operation?" Admiral Blackwood exchanged glances with the other team members before responding. "The courier's information becomes obsolete in 72 hours. After that point, its capture becomes irrelevant to our national security interests." The implication was clear. They had less than 3 days to plan and execute a rescue mission in hostile territory, using routes and methods that wouldn't attract the kind of attention that could escalate into broader conflicts. Alina had undertaken similar missions during her previous assignments, understanding that success often depended on moving so quickly and quietly that enemies didn't realize what had happened until objectives were already accomplished. Colonel Anderson leaned forward, her expression suggesting someone who understood the technical challenges involved in the proposed mission. "Captain, the facility is located in a valley that's surrounded by radar installations and surface-to-air missile sites. Conventional aircraft couldn't penetrate that defensive network without triggering a response that would compromise the mission's covert nature." Alina nodded, recognizing the tactical problem that had undoubtedly led to her selection for this assignment. Penetrating sophisticated air defense systems required the kind of flying that existed at the intersection of skill, technology, and controlled insanity. It was exactly the type of challenge that had earned her the Kraken call sign during previous operations, where unexpected approaches had turned apparent disasters into legendary successes. Dr. Harrison activated another display showing technical specifications for aircraft that Alina immediately recognized as representing the cutting edge of military aviation technology. "You'll be flying a prototype that's been modified specifically for this type of mission. Stealth characteristics that go beyond anything currently in operational service, combined with performance capabilities that will allow you to operate in conditions that would be impossible for conventional aircraft." The aircraft specifications included details that made Alina's pulse quicken with the kind of anticipation that only came from examining technology that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Engine performance ratings that exceeded anything she had previously encountered, avionics systems that integrated human decision-making with artificial intelligence in ways that augmented pilot capabilities rather than replacing them. Ms. Chen stepped forward again, her expression carrying the gravity that accompanied discussions of potential international consequences. "Captain, I need you to understand that this mission exists in a space where success means that it never happened, and failure could result in consequences that extend far beyond military considerations." Alina had operated in similar gray areas throughout her special operations career, understanding that some missions succeeded precisely because they remained invisible to public scrutiny. The most effective operations were often those that accomplished objectives without leaving evidence that could be used to assign blame or justify retaliation. "I understand, ma'am. May I ask about extraction procedures if the mission encounters complications?" Admiral Blackwood's expression suggested appreciation for Alina's focus on practical considerations. "You'll be operating with minimal support, Captain. Success depends on completing the mission quickly enough that enemy forces don't have time to mount an effective response." The phrase "minimal support" was military euphemism for missions where pilots operated beyond the range of friendly forces, relying on their own skills and judgment rather than external assistance. Alina had survived several such assignments, understanding that isolation often provided advantages in terms of operational security while requiring higher levels of individual capability. Colonel Martinez activated a timeline display showing the mission's projected schedule, with specific phases marked according to intelligence estimates of enemy response capabilities. You'll have a window of approximately 4 hours to complete all phases of the operation. After that, defensive forces will be operating at full readiness levels. Alina studied the timeline with the attention to detail that had kept her alive through missions, where minutes could determine the difference between success and catastrophic failure. 4 hours provided enough time for careful execution, while requiring the kind of precision that left no margin for extended delays or unexpected complications. "Sir, when would this mission commence?" Admiral Blackwood glanced at his watch with the gesture of someone calculating remaining time against fixed deadlines. "You depart for the staging area in 6 hours. Mission launch is scheduled for tomorrow evening, during optimal weather and visibility conditions." The compressed timeline was typical of special operations assignments, where security considerations often required rapid transitions from planning to execution. Alina had learned to adapt to such schedules, understanding that extensive preparation time could sometimes compromise operational security more than it improved mission success rates. Dr. Harrison stepped forward with a tablet containing additional technical information. "Captain, you'll receive detailed aircraft familiarization during the flight to the staging area. The prototype incorporates several systems that will require adjustment to your normal operational procedures." Alina accepted the tablet, nodding the way its security features indicated information that existed at classification levels reserved for the most sensitive military technologies. Learning new aircraft systems while in transit to mission launch was not ideal, but she had adapted to similar challenges during previous assignments where circumstances required rapid integration of unfamiliar capabilities. Ms. Chen moved to the map display, pointing to specific locations that represented various stages of the proposed mission profile. "The extraction point is located here, approximately 50 kilometers from the target facility. Ground support personnel will be in position to provide immediate medical attention if needed." The presence of medical support personnel suggested that mission planners anticipated the possibility of casualties, either from combat action or from the physical stress of operating advanced aircraft systems under extreme conditions. Alina appreciated the realistic assessment of potential risks, while noting that successful completion would require avoiding circumstances that made medical intervention necessary. Colonel Anderson stood, her movements suggesting someone preparing for mission-related activities. "Captain, I'll be accompanying you to the staging area to assist with aircraft familiarization and mission planning refinements. My role is to ensure that you have all necessary support for mission success." Alina nodded, recognizing the value of having another experienced pilot available during the critical phases of mission preparation. Special operations assignments often benefited from the kind of collaboration that existed between individuals who understood the unique challenges of operating beyond normal safety margins. Admiral Blackwood moved to the center of the room, his presence commanding attention from all participants. "Ladies and gentlemen, this mission represents the convergence of exceptional personnel, advanced technology, and urgent national security requirements. Success depends on flawless execution by individuals operating at the highest levels of their respective capabilities." Alina absorbed the Admiral's words while mentally shifting into the psychological state that had sustained her through previous special operations assignments. The careful balance between confidence and caution, the methodical review of known factors and potential variables, the acceptance of risks that couldn't be eliminated but could be managed through superior preparation and execution. "Captain Vasquez," Admiral Blackwood continued, Do you have any additional questions about the mission parameters or support arrangements? Alina considered the briefing information while checking her understanding of the operation's critical elements. Sir, I assume there are contingency plans if weather conditions or enemy activity levels deviate from current intelligence estimates. Dr. Harrison nodded approvingly. Multiple contingency scenarios have been developed, with decision points based on real-time intelligence updates. You'll have complete authority to modify mission parameters based on conditions encountered during execution. The delegation of decision-making authority was both empowering and sobering, representing the kind of responsibility that came with operating beyond the range of immediate command oversight. Alina had exercised similar authority during previous missions, understanding that success often depended on the ability to adapt quickly to circumstances that couldn't be anticipated during initial planning phases. In that case, sir, I'm ready to proceed with mission preparation. Admiral Blackwood's slight smile suggested satisfaction with Alina's response. Outstanding, Captain. Transport to the staging area departs at 1400 hours. Colonel Anderson will accompany you and provide additional briefing materials during the flight. Alina saluted the assembled team members, recognizing that this briefing represented the last time she would interact with most of these individuals until after mission completion. Special operations assignments often created temporary communities of highly skilled people who worked together intensively for brief periods before dispersing to other classified activities. As she prepared to leave Conference Room Alpha, Alina's mind began the automatic process of mental preparation that preceded every significant mission of her career. The careful examination of known factors, the identification of potential variables, the methodical review of skills and capabilities that might prove relevant under stress. All of it came flooding back with the muscle memory of someone who had survived by making preparation an art form. Outside the secure briefing facility, Alina found herself back in the normal rhythm of base operations, but with the knowledge that her participation in that routine world was about to be suspended for the duration of a mission that existed in the spaces between official military operations. She had 6 hours to complete personal preparation for an assignment that would test every skill she had developed during 23 years of military service. The next few hours would determine whether her 5 years of peaceful anonymity had dulled the edge that had once made her one of the most capable pilots in Special Operations Command, or whether her essential capabilities remained intact beneath the deliberately ordinary surface she had cultivated during her maintenance assignment years. Alina returned to her quarters to collect the minimal personal equipment that she carried on Special Operations assignments, items that provided psychological comfort without adding unnecessary weight or complexity to mission planning. The wooden box containing her grandfather's compass, her training class photograph, and her mother's unopened letter would remain behind, too precious to risk in environments where personal possessions could become casualties of circumstances beyond anyone's control. Her flight gear, however, required careful attention. The helmet that had protected her through countless missions, modified with personal adjustments that optimized fit and visibility. The survival equipment that had kept her alive during previous assignments in hostile territory. The small toolkit that contained backup instruments and emergency repair items that could mean the difference between successful mission completion and catastrophic failure. Each item was checked and rechecked with the methodical attention to detail that had become second nature during years when equipment failure could prove fatal. Alina had learned that survival often depended on the quality of preparation during periods when immediate danger seemed distant, and that lesson had shaped her approach to every aspect of military service. At precisely 13:30 hours, she made her way to the flight line, where a transport aircraft waited with engines already warming to operational temperature. Colonel Anderson stood near the aircraft's boarding ramp, her posture suggesting someone accustomed